Michael Blake never planned to run for office. But when police arrested his students and neighbors turned away in silence, he realized silence wasn't an option. No one believed a quiet teacher could change the system until millions wrote his name on the ballot. What happened next will shock even those who've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Michael Blake, a 42-year-old history teacher from Fairmount, Georgia, was a man of quiet strength and deep conviction. Standing tall with a composed demeanor and thoughtful eyes that often seemed to be searching for answers beyond the present, Michael carried the weight of his community's hopes and struggles on his shoulders. He wasn't the kind of man who sought the spotlight. He found fulfillment in the classroom, shaping young minds with stories of resilience, resistance, and the power of collective action. His lessons were more than history. They were blueprints for navigating a world that often tried to silence voices like his. Michael's passion for education ran deep. He saw teaching not just as a job, but as a responsibility, a way to empower the next generation of Black youth with knowledge their ancestors fought to obtain. His students admired him for his calm authority and his ability to connect historical struggles to their modern-day realities. Yet, despite his dedication to activism through education, Michael held a bitter skepticism toward politics. He believed the system was too corrupt, too entrenched in prejudice, to ever allow real change for Black citizens. To him, politics was a game rigged in favor of those in power. That belief was tested one morning when news broke of a devastating education bill that slashed funding for schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods. The bill, passed without consideration for the communities it would impact, sparked outrage. Parents, teachers, and community leaders organized a town meeting to voice their frustrations. Michael attended reluctantly, expecting to remain on the sidelines. But as the discussion heated up and despair filled the room, the crowd turned to him for guidance. When he took the floor, Michael spoke with quiet intensity, his words cutting through the tension like a beacon of hope. Education is the foundation of our future. They don't want us educated because they fear what we'll achieve. His message resonated deeply, sparking applause and chants for him to run for office. Though humbled, Michael waved off the calls with a dismissive smile. "Politics isn't for me," he said. But the crowd wasn't convinced, especially Jamal, one of his former students, who stood and asked, "You taught us to fight back. Why won't you?" That question haunted Michael as he walked home. For the first time, he wondered if the battle he'd avoided all his life was the very one he needed to fight. Despite Michael Blake's refusal to enter politics, his name began to spread like wildfire across Fairmount County. What started as whispers in church halls and barbershops soon grew into a movement. Local activists, inspired by his impassioned words, saw in him the leader they had long been waiting for. Without his consent, they launched a grassroots campaign that caught everyone's attention. Flyers with Michael's face and the slogan, "Blake for Governor," were posted on every street corner. Community members organized rallies, and chants of "Blake for Governor" echoed through the streets, growing louder with each passing day. The movement didn't go unnoticed. Harold Simmons, the incumbent governor, was a staunch defender of the status quo. His policies reinforced systemic inequalities, and he made no secret of his disdain for efforts to address racial inequities. When news of Michael's growing popularity reached his office, Simmons convened a private meeting with law enforcement officials. His message was chilling. "Keep an eye on them. We can't let them get too confident." Tensions mounted as police presence increased at community gatherings. One night, after a long day of teaching, Michael returned home to a shocking sight. A note pinned to his front door. The words, scrawled in thick black letters, read, "Stay out of politics. or else. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, the note fluttering in the evening breeze. The threat was clear, but it wasn't enough to silence him. The next morning, news spread that police had raided the local community center. Several prominent activists were arrested on fabricated charges. Michael watched in horror as some of his students, the same young people he had taught to stand up for their rights, were dragged away in handcuffs. Their frightened faces, pressed against the windows of police vans, ignited a fire inside him. He couldn't stay silent any longer. Michael began attending rallies, speaking not as a candidate, but as a mentor and advocate for justice. "We don't need politicians to make change," he told a restless crowd. "We need people who believe in justice." But the crowd, tired of empty promises and oppression, roared back, their voices unified. "We need you." Michael's resolve deepened. The people weren't asking for a leader. They were demanding one. As Election Day drew near, the movement behind Michael Blake gained unstoppable momentum. What began as small rallies and grassroots efforts grew into a statewide phenomenon. Media outlets, intrigued by the mystery of a black man leading a campaign without ever registering to run, began covering the story with fervor. News anchors debated the legality of Michael's candidacy. Can a man who hasn't even declared his run still win the governorship? Headlines questioned the system that allowed for write-in candidates to make such waves. In Fairmount, the people found their answer. They didn't need Michael's permission to vote for him. A loophole in the voting system allowed write-in candidates to be legally counted. Suddenly, handmade signs reading, "Write in Michael Blake," appeared in windows, yards, and shop fronts across the county. The movement spread to other towns and cities, sparking hope in communities long ignored by the political establishment. Meanwhile, Governor Harold Simmons grew increasingly desperate. His campaign team proposed typical political tactics: smear campaigns, attack ads, and manufactured scandals. But Simmons, a man who thrived on control and intimidation, wanted more extreme measures. He ordered police to increase patrols in predominantly black neighborhoods, launching raids under the guise of enforcing minor infractions. His goal was clear: instill fear and suppress the growing movement. The tension boiled over one evening when Jamal, one of Michael's former students and a key activist, was arrested for violating curfew. In reality, he had simply been walking home from his job at a local diner. News of his arrest spread quickly, igniting outrage. Furious, Michael stormed into the police station, demanding Jamal's release. The police chief, flanked by officers, sneered at him. "And who are you to make demands?" Michael met his gaze with unflinching determination. "I'm the voice of this community, and whether you like it or not, I'll soon be your governor." His words hung in the air, filled with a confidence that even he hadn't fully embraced before. The chief, unsettled by Michael's certainty and the growing unrest outside the station, ordered Jamal's release. As Jamal walked free, his eyes filled with gratitude and pride, Michael finally accepted what his community had known all along. He was their leader, and they weren't backing down. Election Day arrived. Despite voter suppression efforts, record numbers of black voters showed up. News stations were stunned by the sheer volume of write-in votes for Michael Blake. Governor Simmons called a press conference, claiming victory prematurely. "The people have spoken, and they chose stability," he declared. But hours later, news broke. Michael Blake had won by a landslide. He had become the first black governor in the state's history. Standing on the steps of the Capitol, Michael addressed the crowd. "They tried to silence us. They tried to make us invisible. But today, we proved that the people's voice is unstoppable." The crowd roared. Jamal, now free and standing beside his mentor, wiped tears from his eyes. Michael's election sparked a nationwide movement for justice. Laws began to change. Schools were funded. And for the first time in decades, Black communities felt empowered. As Michael walked into the governor's office, he saw a note on his desk. "For the future, you never gave up on." Michael smiled. The fight had only just begun.